Hello, welcome everybody. I hope you're well. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to wait for as many people as possible to arrive. So while we're waiting, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let people know where you're dialing in from. So welcome and do settle in. We're just waiting for everybody else to join. We're going to give it just a few more minutes. So please do introduce yourself in the chat. And let us know where you're dialing in from. Welcome to those of you who've only just joined us. We're very pleased to have you here today. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. We're just waiting for everybody else to jump on the call, and then we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this sunny day to launch the Better Business Act campaign. My name is Hannah, I'm the BBA campaign manager, and it's absolutely my pleasure to welcome so many of you here today. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. You'll notice that your microphones are on mute. It would be great if you could please keep your microphones muted throughout. And for the best experience, please select the speaker view at the top right-hand corner rather than the gallery view. If you have any comments or questions, please do drop them into the chat and we'll try to respond. Or send us an email at act@betterbusinessact.org so that we can get back to you in slower time. We're also recording this session, so just to be aware. Right, our agenda for today runs as follows. So we'll start with Chris Turner taking you through a bit of scene setting on why now is the moment to act, why we need this change right now. Then Luke Fletcher will introduce us to the history and form of the Better Business Act. And then we will hear from experienced campaigner Catherine Sladden on the art of building a movement. Then we will have Chris Turner accompanied by Karen Basra to take us through where we are at the campaign right now. And finally end with a keynote speech from Douglas Lamont, the CEO of Innocent Drinks and chair of the BBA. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Chris Turner, Executive Director of B-Lab UK and Campaign Director for the Better Business Act. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And yeah, just to echo your thanks to everyone for joining us. It's such an exciting moment for us to be kicking off. This is our first BBA event, so the first time we've had both BBA coalition members and I know many of you who aren't as well joining us to hear a little bit more about what we've been up to, what this is all about, and what's coming up. So very, very exciting. We're going to keep this short and snappy. There's so much we could talk about, but I think the key for us here is really just kind of leaving you all with a real sense for the energy behind this campaign, for the potential, and for what we can all achieve together. So we're going to go at quite a clip to get through all of that, and we'll leave you with some really clear kind of actions to take forward. Before I dive in, I want to also thank Hannah, who you just heard from. Hannah's been our campaign manager and has done an incredible job behind the scenes on lots of the work that you're going to hear more about today. And there's a broader team as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but we've got another Hannah who's in the chat will be responding to questions and things there, and many more people that I could thank. So thanks to all of them. And And yeah, to all of you, I think we're edging up towards 200 people on the line now, which is fantastic. And the coalition itself, as of this morning, is also edging up, and we're nearly at 300 businesses signed up to the coalition. So for those of you who aren't members yet, who are on the line, you could be the 300th. So please do, if you're inspired by what you're about to hear. So I wanted to kick us off. I wanted to put up a slide, which I don't expect you to read because there's a lot on here. But this was if you've downloaded our decks, if you've browsed our website, then you've seen this before. This is sort of the narrative that we crafted to sit behind the campaign. And we drafted this towards the end of last year in the autumn. And it tells a story, like any narrative. It tells a story that ultimately goes back 50 years to the sort of fracture between business and society and the interests that they share or not. And then it's sort of it weaves together kind of ultimately what is a story of corporate governance and the economic system, and moving on to what our kind of solution to that is. But more kind of immediately and tangibly, what it also does is tell the story of a disconnect between people and business, and that's obviously something that's very, very real and tangible, and something that we can see in the impact that business has on people's lives. You can see there that one of those bold comments, they're poll results. We ran a poll in the middle of last year where we learned that 76% of the UK population want business to be legally responsible for their impact. But even since then, and since those results, I think what we're seeing is that becoming much more kind of a visceral sense that people have, and a kind of more a more sort of day-to-day understanding of sort of businesses which are ultimately good and rooted in community and responsible for their impact and taking that ownership, versus those businesses which aren't. So you've got that kind of increasingly a sort of personal and kind of conscious understanding of that. But then on the other hand, I think what the story that we're telling here is also a sort of soul searching that's been happening on the part of business, trying to understand exactly what its role is in solving some of the kind of big fundamental challenges that we all face. And ultimately, what we're also nodding to here is a certain degree of powerlessness that business leaders experience in trying to steer their businesses towards solving those challenges. And that's definitely something that we want to address here. But I think that in putting this up and just kind of nodding into it very briefly, what I wanted to say was that this is a story. While we crafted this with our partners at the end of last year, this is a story that we could have told probably any time in the last 5 or 10 years, with sort of increasing urgency, obviously thinking about the climate emergency, and obviously with COVID over the last year. But it is a story that spans the last 50 years, and it is a story rooted in quite kind of fundamental challenges related to our economic system. So with that in mind, and with that kind of broad sort of sweep, what I thought we thought it'd be fun to kind of start off by thinking about these big challenges and thinking about what we're trying to achieve. And we've got a poll that we're going to throw out to you all. I think Catherine, who's behind the scenes, is in charge of the poll. And really, I think the slides are running away with us now. I'm still on the first one, Catherine. But the poll that we're going to put out there is really thinking about this broad sweep, thinking about these big challenges, and ultimately what we'd love to get a sense from you all, now 200 on the line, is seeing and thinking about the Better Business Act coming to life. What are the big challenges that you'd like to ultimately see our impact in terms of solving? So, we've got, is it on the way? Is the poll on the way? Whether it's happening or not. Here we go. So you've got the options on the screen now, and it ranges all the way from, as I say, sort of the immediate Build Back Better to some of these issues which are becoming more and more acute in terms of bridging inequality and obviously the race to net zero. But we just love to get a feel for where your energy is, and knowing that the Better Business Act is a kind of systems level shift. Where your kind of real passion is in terms of the impact that we can have. So I can see the results coming in live. I'm not sure whether you all can, but there's a lot of emphasis here on sort of the next generation and real kind of long-term prosperity and well-being, which is fantastic. And interestingly, the lowest scorer at the moment is building back better post-COVID, which is fascinating. So I think we've got probably most of your scores in now. Brilliant. All right. And hopefully you can all see the results. But the winner is actually the UK leading unresponsible business. So which is brilliant. That's something we've been hearing a lot, and we've been playing back a lot in our conversations with lawmakers, is what an opportunity this is for the UK to really sort of establish a position of leadership here. But clearly net zero is coming through strongly. Clearly that generational well-being is a real priority here. So thank you for that. Fascinating stuff, and we're going to save those results. Now, on the next slide, what I wanted to touch on was, that's our big picture. I wanted to touch on 2021 and why this is a real moment. If this story could have been told in the last 5 or 10 years, why is 2021 the moment at which we can really kind of go big with this change and do something very meaningful? And I was trying to think of an image here which would sum up 2021 and everything that awaits. And what I thought was actually, well, this so far is the defining image of 2021. I think it's such an incredible photo. And I guess it defines, obviously it's a big moment, but it also kind of defines perhaps how lots of us feel right now in terms of kind of being stuck, being on hold. It's maybe how we feel as individuals if we're stuck in bedrooms or living rooms or studies. But also, to some extent, it also reflects how our economies are, in this sort of holding pattern, on hold, businesses waiting to get going again after the pandemic. So it says a lot. I think it says a lot about how we're all feeling, but also about our systems and our economies as well. But I think the other reason why I put this up, and some of you who I know will have heard me sort of talk about the Better Business Act in this way before, is that in some ways I kind of like to think about the Better Business Act as a sort of, it's almost like the wheel on the ship, on the deck of a ship like this. There's the sort of slow turning circle of our economic system, and all of the complexity and the weight and the product that goes into delivering via, through business. What we're talking about here is not sort of getting into the weeds of that. What we're talking about is a sort of a symbolic and a kind of directional shift, so that all of that stuff that goes on is going on while we're pointing the whole ship in the right direction and not into a sandy bank or off a cliff. So instead of a metaphor that I've used a few times in the past, so a nice sort of serendipity here that it's also the image of the year. But when I talk about 2021 and when we think about what's ahead, I just in a minute or two, I just wanted to paint a bit of a picture for you in terms of this opportunity. And certainly, yes, the recovery from COVID, presents a chance, as you will all have heard many times, for us to do things a little bit differently. And what's interesting here is that that's an opportunity which clearly is being recognised by government as they're looking to do things a bit differently. But it's also clearly a reality that an increasing and wide range of citizens recognise that actually they don't want the system and they don't want things to go back to the way they were. On the government side, I think you've got a real appetite for new ideas, and that's what this is. It's a change, it's a shift. And of course, we've got a government that has a majority to actually put new ideas into practice as well. And actually, we are seeing legislation coming through, which is very relevant to the work that we're doing. Some of you with an eye on this stuff may have seen the corporate governance consultation, which launched just a couple of weeks ago. So this is a very live space. It's a very dynamic space where the Better Business Act has a lot to say, and where we can be part of a lot of conversations with a very clear and tangible proposal. Of course, in the poll just now, we heard most of you, or a great proportion of you, sort of describing how this is a real opportunity for the UK to show leadership, and that's at a time when, particularly in 2021, we know the UK is really looking to craft its sort of post-Brexit identity on the world stage. We know we've got the presidency of the G7. We know we've also got COP in the UK this year as well. And indeed, that whole sort of, the whole climate emergency and the sort of the the attention that will have this year also creates an amazing opportunity for us to paint a real picture of the role that business can play in meeting some really big goals. So there's a huge sweep here in terms of kind of the direction that we're going in, the UK specifically, and specific events as well, like G7 and COP, that we can tap into. This is all happening in the context of the UK already being a bit of a sort of hotbed of thinking in terms of how we need to make shifts to our economic system. And we've many of our advisors and colleagues from the BBA are looped into those conversations, are those academics, and have been working on lots of that stuff. And that ultimately has given us a sort of heritage that's allowed us to craft a really kind of clear amendment upon which we base the clear asks of the campaign itself. And so on the next slide, before I hand over to Luke, sorry, Catherine Moore, thank you. Before I hand over to Luke, I wanted to very quickly run through these 4 principles. So you've seen these, you've signed up to these, but ultimately we want these to be very simple. We want these to be very immediate. We didn't want to sort of root all of our communications and all of our conversations in a piece of legislation. What we want to do ultimately is to say this is what we're trying to achieve through legislation, and we hope that you find that all sort of an easier ask to speak to. So I'll do that. I'll do that now. So the first principle is aligned interests, and here it's all about the interests of shareholders and other stakeholders, so wider society and the environment all being aligned. There's no sort of there's no binary here. It's not profit or purpose, or however you may have heard that sort of that laid out. This can all be done at once. And again, some of our heritage here in the B Corp movement and working with businesses who have aligned the interests of their stakeholders and shareholders to prove that this is a good way of doing business, and that this is not a choice, doesn't have to be a choice. So the first principle is to ultimately establish that alignment of interests within Section 172 of the Companies Act, so it becomes a new principle of fiduciary duty. Now, the second principle harks back to that Section 172 piece, essentially saying that we want to do this by empowering directors. So I kind of mentioned the powerlessness that businesses can feel and business leaders can feel in terms of focusing their businesses on helping to solve some of our big challenges. And this is all about putting power in directors' hands to make those judgments and to advance the interests of all of their stakeholders and shareholders. Now, number 3 is key. Number 3 is that this needs to be the default. We're past the point where businesses can choose whether or not to align these interests. There simply isn't time to wait for all businesses to make that choice. And so this needs to become the default for all UK businesses. And then the final principle here, number 4, is that this needs to be reflected in reporting. And we're really excited to dive into a big kind of conversation here about reporting, where there's already a huge amount of great work being done. But for now, this principle number 4 essentially says that where a strategic report is required, then a business needs to report on how they're advancing these interests and ultimately aligning them in that report. So having just run through those very, very briefly, I want to hand over to Luke Fletcher, who's been instrumental in this work. He's been advising and contributing towards the development of benefit corporation legislation around the world. And he's a great friend of the B Corp movement and the broader movement of sort of business for good in the UK. So Luke, handing over to you to give us a little bit more background on the Act itself.
Great, thank you, Chris, so much for the introduction. I don't propose to go through each of the provisions of the Act because I suspect we'll probably see 100 or so people drop out of the room if I did that. But I'm going to give a bit of context on the Act, so where it came from, how it's come about, and I'm going to answer some of the key questions that we get on the Act. So the Act is, in a sense, a natural and evolutionary step, which is informed by other legal and policy developments elsewhere. So in the last decade or so, 40 US states have adopted benefit corporation legislation. That's legislation in over 40 different jurisdictions, each state having its own legislature and political process. And a host of other countries around the world have either adopted benefit corporation legislation or are seriously looking at that possibility. And invariably, this legislation is passed on a bipartisan basis and has broad political support. And importantly, one of the key jurisdictions that's passed that legislation is Delaware, which is probably the world's leading corporate law jurisdiction, with many of the world's largest companies based in Delaware. And so in a sense, we've seen something of a corporate law revolution already with the spread of this benefit corporation concept that simply wasn't around before 2010. There are now about 4,000 or so benefit corporations, many of which, importantly, are not B Corps. So there's no requirement for a benefit corporation incorporated under one of these statutes to become a B Corp. Similarly, there would be no requirement under the Act that we're proposing for businesses to become B Corps. So this isn't about special pleading or advancing the B Corp movement itself, far from it. Now in the UK, we have a community of 500 B Corps operating a different corporate governance model. And under English law, companies have this option of adopting a different form of corporate purpose beyond merely benefiting the shareholders. And so the B Corp community is now the largest mainstream business community using this flexibility under English law. And they have the ability to benefit society and the environment as well as their shareholders. The directors are empowered to do that. And we can see that these businesses are successful. They're varied. They're in different industries and sectors. They have different sizes and different complexities. So that's the context for the Act. And those are some of the things that have informed the Act. But there's also a sense in which what we're proposing is not merely a natural and evolutionary step, but it's also a radical step change, because we're saying it's now time to flip the default governance model for all businesses. And if it were to be implemented, the Act would be a world first, and it would secure the UK's position as a global leader in this space, which was obviously one of the things that the poll suggested people want to see. So we're saying that operating a triple bottom line should be the default for all businesses. It should be the starting point, the minimum. And some of the world's leading corporate governance experts, people like Leo Strine, who's the former Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court, and Professor Colin Mayer at Oxford, who's been leading the Future of the Corporation program, and Jaap Winter, who's probably the leading corporate governance expert in Europe and advises the EU. These people are essentially calling for the same thing. They're asking for large businesses to become benefit corporations. So we know this governance model works. Why not flip the default? And just moving to some of the top questions that people have about the Act. Is the Act in the interests of shareholders? As Chris was saying, yes, we think it is in the interests of shareholders if they want sustainable returns across the whole economic system over time. So it's about aligning those interests across the system over time. Does the Act limit the profitability of businesses or returns to shareholders? No, there are no limits on returns. Does the Act create new rights on the part of stakeholders against companies? That's a common concern. But no, stakeholders don't have any new rights against companies or against directors. Does the Act create new sources of liability for directors of companies? No, directors don't have any new forms of liability. They have the same duties that they currently have to the company, though the shape of those duties changes. And so yes, directors would be empowered to advance the interests of all stakeholders. So to conclude, to my mind, the presumption has shifted. Instead of why a Better Business Act, I would say we should be asking why not, given the climate and biodiversity crises, given benefit corporation legislation works, given B Corps are successful and growing, given we need a radical shift to a low carbon economy, given our other social challenges. The question, I think, is why not? Chris, back to you.
Thank you very much, Luke. That's fantastic and very succinct. So really appreciate that. And yeah, great to address some of those key questions. And I think it's, you know, one of the most exciting things about having all of you here on this call is because we still haven't launched yet. I mean, we're launching right now. And so, we've been in this sort of soft launch phase where we've started having an increasing number of conversations, and we've managed to gather some of these kind of frequently asked questions that Luke has just responded to, so that now when we sort of go to a wider audience and start getting some of these questions, and you will start getting some of these questions as you talk about the Better Business Act, we're in a really good position to go back with some very clear answers like those which Luke just ran through. And by the way, there's also an FAQ section on the website, which is very useful for kind of checking in on those responses. So moving from the legislation and the Act itself, I think one of the really exciting things here, and I'm looking at the chat and all these amazing kind of intros, you're dialing in from all over the UK, indeed some further afield, and the sort of enthusiasm and passion for this. And I can see a comment there saying sort of, it's almost impossible to believe anyone could think this was a bad idea. And I try not to think about the pub too much at the moment, but there's also the pub test here, where you sitting in the pub and speaking with people who aren't engaged on corporate governance, and simply talking about the fact that this isn't a requirement right now for the interests of society and the environment to be aligned with those of shareholders. It's pretty surprising to people that that's not already the case. And so I think it's really exciting that as part of this campaign, what we can do is start thinking about how we build something of a movement here, and as how we start engaging kind of audiences beyond those which are really engaged in corporate governance, and looking to businesses employees, and then starting to look at kind of customers and broader sort of citizen engagement. And so with that in mind, we've invited Catherine Sladden along to give us some of her kind of wisdom and insights on how that might start to happen. Now, Catherine was campaigns director at change.org, working on campaigns like getting women on banknotes and No More Page 3. More recently, she's been working on the Grenfell United campaign, and she's advised, I think, a lot of other organizations that you'd all be sort of really fascinated in. So we'll hear a little bit more about that. But Catherine, over to you to share some of your wisdom with us. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I've been asked to talk about building a movement, and I'm going to give you a kind of whistle-stop tour from my experience, kind of 15 years working with activists, companies, organizations that are pushing for change. Hopefully it will take away a few insights to help your campaign move forward, also a bit of a framework for what the journey ahead might look like, and some inspiration from some examples that I want to bring to the table. I would say that, a lot of my references are from people-powered movements, but I really believe what are businesses if they're not people-powered? Your employees, your leadership, your customers, they're all people that can be mobilized for a vision for the world. And so to kick off, I thought, let's start with the definition of what a movement is. And it's very simply a group of people mobilized to take action driven by a shared vision of how the world should be. And I think all of these businesses coming together, to balance profit, people, planet, the impact of that could be amazing. And it's a vision that I think so many people will want to sign up for and be a part of creating. But what kind of sets movements apart? What makes one movement successful, one campaign really successful, and other ones never really quite take off? Well, if you look at great movements out there, whether it's the school climate strikers, Me Too, BLM, there are sort of 5 things that you really see that stand out in movements that are being really successful. So one is that vision. What's the vision that people can really believe in? So what does it look like to live in a world where profit, people, and planet are really balanced, and businesses are valuing that? What's that vision? Let's bring that to life and let's inspire people with your vision. But then people need to have that credible plan. Are we really going to get there? How are we really going to make change? And I think that's where this Better Business Act really comes in, as such a kind of clear, fundamental, tangible change that people can get behind that want to go on this journey. And as you develop this campaign, what does it look like to break that down into smaller steps and build this kind of plan for change that people think, actually, we really can make a difference. And the other thing that really powerful movements have is they have really clear values that people can subscribe to. Not everyone will resonate with your values, and that's okay. You want your values to stand out and to attract people in. Values that will be the things that attract people to join your movement. I believe in this too. This speaks to me. I'm someone that identifies with these values, and I want to be a part of this. So thinking about how as a group of businesses, you're really showing your values, speaking your values, walking the talk as you go. And then actions. think a movement really needs momentum, and I'm going to touch on that in examples. But for me, momentum is one of those things that if the momentum's with you, then you're winning a campaign. You can't win a campaign until you've got momentum on your side. And for momentum, you need actions. What are things that supporters can really do? And I think on this call, you're going to be given a little bit of homework afterwards of kind of how you can get involved. And people can get involved at all different levels, but you need to kind of really think, how are we going to ask people to join this movement and take action with us? And who can take action to help you? Is it your employees? Is it your customers? How can you bring more people into this movement and give them more useful things to do towards getting this act through? And then the other thing you need, which I think you all have in spades, is inspiring leaders. And successful movements aren't actually driven by one leader. They tend to be leaderful. So who are those kind of interesting leaders that can step forward and be willing to kind of speak out on this issue? And something that works really well is a mix of different people. So, you know, unusual partnerships, people that don't usually come together on an issue, but on this, they're united, is something that we see the development sector doing really well when they're speaking out on securing kind of our commitment to global aid. You see them bring business and military and consumers all together around those causes. So how can you make the most of the fact that you're so many different types of leaders are on this call, so many different types of businesses willing to stand by each other, and maybe you're competitive in other spaces, but on this you're really united, and that inspires people. So a vision, a plan, values, action, and leaders, those are your 5 things that really make a movement. So if we go to the next slide, thanks. This is looking at what the journey looks like. And from my experience working with lots of campaigns, big and small, there tends to be 4 phases to a campaign that's growing and doing well. You have the kind of launch phase where you're in now, where you're organizing yourself, you're making your plan, you're establishing your legitimacy, you're recruiting people to your cause. And then the next stage is kind of, how do you get this into the public domain? What's the surge moment that breaks you through into national media, into the pub conversation? Looking ahead to this year, you've got, you know, COP 2016, you've got the G7 in the UK. There are these kind of big moments where you could try and get this on the agenda. But you can also create some of those moments yourself using creativity and partnerships and so on. So how are you going to kind of create moments to get this talked about and out there? And then once you do that, well, how do you sustain it? So it's not just a kind of a front page of the newspaper one day and the bin the next. How are you going to sustain and have these conversations with the people you need to have to keep it on the agenda? And then you'll notice a moment in a campaign where you're into the transformational change phase, where you've got yourself a seat at the negotiating table, you're talking to decision makers, and you need to convert this vision that you have into, you know, law, policy, long-term change. And each of those stages require kind of different skills. They have a different energy about them, and you know them when you're in them. But those are the sort of stages that most successful campaigns really go through. And it is a bit of a journey, and really transformational change doesn't just come overnight, but keeping that momentum moving forward, you can get there. Next slide. So now I just wanted to share a few examples of, you know, different types of campaigns that might feel outside your space, but I think you can draw a lot of inspiration from. So Marcus Rashford and his free school meal campaign is instantly one that comes to mind. And you see it going through those 4 stages. So the launch, you know, he started off with a public letter to the government on the issue, and that kind of put him out there talking about this issue. And then you had these surge moments where there were debates in Parliament where we didn't know coming up to half term or Christmas whether this was going to go through, and it was a national conversation, but then it fell away and he was declined. So how did he sustain it? Well, actually it was local businesses across the country that stepped forward and felt, hey, no, we subscribe to these values, we want to show that we care about this. So if the government won't step up, we will step up in our community and provide free school meals. And that's the thing about a movement, when you do it well, you create this energy that other people really can step forward and into. So you saw that sustain, and now that's got him, you know, a seat at the table. He's negotiating with government on what's the long-term solution to this issue. So really kind of interesting example of, you know, a momentum behind a campaign that took us through those stages. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to kind of give you a couple examples where you don't have to be a huge footballer to make a difference. And, you know, my time at Change.org, I really saw just how anyone with the right idea and the right energy behind them and the right team can make change. And I think Caroline Criado Perez is a great example. She campaigned to get a woman on a banknote. And actually the first thing Mark Carney did when he came into office at the Bank of England, his first press conference was about putting Jane Austen on the £10 note in the middle of an economic crisis. So there you go. She really made cut through, and then her campaign to get a statue. And she also inspired Laura Corton, who was, I think, 17 years old doing her A-levels when she started the campaign to drop VAT on tampons, and, you know, got that into the Chancellor's budget, and now it's just come through. And one of the things that to take away from these campaigns is that what I talk about, the little big thing. So a lot of these campaigns, it's not really about women on a banknote, it's about how we're talking about and recognising women in our history. Same with the statue. It's not just about the tampon tax, but it's about a conversation about the economic burden and tax, that unfair tax that women pay. But we kind of have those conversations through having a really clear ask, something tangible that you can have a debate and a conversation around. And that's why I think this Better Business Act, it's about the act, but it's also about the conversation that will come around it and the change that you'll see around it. And then just two more kind of quick examples. So obviously I couldn't not mention Grenfell United, who I've been campaigning with for 3 years, supporting them. And when we talk about these surge moments, sometimes you have to create them yourselves. And so you have to kind of do something bold to get out there. And this was 2 years after the fire, when there was still no real reform to building safety. We projected onto these huge tower blocks in a really unmissable way and just put this back on the agenda. And then the next slide. And then this is a very different example. You don't always need big budgets to campaign. When we're all disconnected for the Grenfell anniversary last year, we want to kind of show people that we're still here, we're still campaigning, there's still a community that are caring about this issue. And so we asked people to play a green film on their TV or laptop that lit up their living room and take a photo of it. So we had all these moments where we could see across the country, people were taking that moment for the campaign. And I think as you kind of build this movement and this campaign, how you come together and keep your community strong and support each other on it is really important. And then I think I've got one more example. So yeah, I just wanted to finish with an example from a business campaign. So this is going back to when I worked at the One campaign, and I think an organisation I really admire that does great campaigning with businesses is Red, and they work to end HIV and AIDS. And yes, they mobilise businesses to donate profits, but they do a lot more than that. And this is going back a few years now when Obama was president, but he wasn't really stepping up on HIV and AIDS and treatment programs that the US had historically backed in Africa. It was slipping off the agenda. And it was actually this coalition of businesses that really helped get us back on the agenda. So we planned an event in Washington, DC around World AIDS Day. We had big partners there like Coca-Cola, coalitions with celebrities. Alicia Keys turned up, and the businesses sort of said, well, we're going to be here, Obama, you might want to come and make a speech. So we kind of created an event with the mindset was, if we build it, he's going to have to come, or it will be embarrassing for him not to be in that room. If we can get these high profile people, these businesses making pledges. So he came, and obviously if he's going to come and speak, he has to say something. So that he ended up pledging billions more for HIV treatment in Africa. And it was, you know, the power of businesses to come together and kind of say, we're stepping up, and government, you should step us with us, that really helped lead that change. So just a little bit of inspiration, I hope, a little bit of framework of moving forward. Momentum really is key. And as you launch, how do you keep the action going? Little, you know, everyone playing their little part is what's going to add up to that bigger change. So good luck. And I'm really excited to see where this takes you. I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That's brilliant. Yeah, amazing. I can see in the chat people loving the examples and some of that insight. So thank you very, very much. And obviously we'll be chatting to Catherine and benefiting from her skills and wisdom throughout. So with that in mind, I think with that picture of, you know, how we can take this campaign forward, we wanted to give you just a very quick sense for some of the work that's been going on behind the scenes to get us to this point. And I mentioned that we're nearly at 300 businesses signed up to the coalition now. But on the next slide, you'll see just in summary sort of the building blocks here. And these aren't These aren't sequential, they're not static. We're working on all of this stuff ongoing. But just to give you a glimpse that on the one hand, what we've been doing behind the scenes is we've been building out a team here. And it's important to note, you've heard lots of talk about B Corps. This isn't a B Corp campaign, and it's not a B Lab campaign. This is set up as an independent campaign. In fact, looking at the attendees coming along today, the majority of you are not from B Corps, so that's brilliant. And indeed, a large proportion now of the businesses signed up to the coalition aren't B Corps. And so this is a standalone. The BBA has its own team, a dedicated secretariat, and we've created a whole independent governance structure with Douglas, who we'll hear from shortly, as co-chair, with an a steering group. And then with a series of advisory and working groups as well, all sort of supporting on that. So standalone team, standalone campaign. And then on the coalition side, as I say, we've got a huge sort of breadth now in terms of coalition members, even pre-launch. And Catherine just there talking about all of the sort of individual actions, and I certainly bringing more businesses into the coalition, I think is a really powerful, thinking about that network effect of the nearly 300 businesses now bringing other businesses into the coalition, I think is incredibly powerful. And then on the final of these three blocks, the campaign itself. And this is where we're going to be looking beyond the launch phase that we're in right now to the sort of that kind of surge and sustain phase that Catherine was talking about, and thinking about how I love one of the things Catherine said I really loved is the idea of a great campaign being leaderful. How we can really sort of think about each and every one of you as being leaders here, and how all of you sort of carry that momentum through the phases to come. So on the next slide, I'm going to hand over to Karam, who's been leading on the public affairs work that we've been doing, just to give you a sense for when we talk about the Act and when we talk about campaigning, what this looks like on the public affairs side to really make it a reality. So over to you, Karam.
Thanks, Chris. So, I think just to kind of preface this as well, we've got a great idea, from Luke, and we've got brilliant kind of draft legislation. We've got fantastic coalitions, and we've got kind of 300 businesses here, 210 on the call, which is frankly amazing. But kind of how do we do it? How do we turn that into law? And I guess that's the big question, and that's the point of a kind of public affairs strategy. So that timeline gives you a little bit of a sense of what we've been doing. And I think the key step when it comes to making law is obviously going out there and talking to people. And I think there's kind of 650 people that it's really important that we go out and talk to. And that's MPs in the Commons, and far, far more up in the Lords as well, which is kind of ever growing. And I think when we've gone out and been talking to politicians in this kind of soft engagement phase, what we've been doing is trying to let that group know who we are and the fact that we're a kind of credible group and a credible voice in Westminster. And that's what we're trying to do on a cross-party basis. So going out and talking to relevant all-party groups who are groups that coalesce around a certain issue or a particular set of issues. Also going out and talking to select committees. And what we've been doing in that process is asking for MPs that we speak to put down questions and ask parliamentary questions with a view to kind of building collateral and understanding what the responses will be from government when we do go out to government. So I guess moving away from that sort of 650 group over to government, and government are really important in this process, recognising that the government has a majority of 48. Anything that we do has to go through government. So on this slide, we talk about private members' bills and a sort of backbench approach. But what's important to remember is our ambitions will only move forwards if we have the government on board. So what we're doing there when we're speaking to government is understanding their concerns and also recognising that, as Chris mentioned earlier, there's a big piece of work coming forward anyway, so the government consultation that's on that slide. So we have a moment to engage, which is really exciting, and the fact that that is coming through. And I think another thing that we're very keen to do when we go and talk to government is to recognise that there's credible voices outside who are supportive. So groups like, well, business representative groups, trade unions, and I think in this whole sphere of corporate governance as well, we're recognising that sort of regulators are incredibly important. So we're going out and talking to the Financial Reporting Council, who are important in this area. So I think that kind of brings us on to, you know, what's the surge moment, as Catherine put it earlier, and our next step. So we've got a parliamentary launch on the 14th of April, where we've got people like the TUC and the IOD speaking to the importance of the bill, and Luke also outlining what we're doing, what our ambitions are, and what we hope to do. And then soon after that, we'll have the Queen's speech, which I think probably is one of those crucial surge moments that Catherine spoke about, where the government will outline its agenda for the year, and that will include that big piece of corporate governance reform that we spoke about. And then soon after that, we'll be putting down a private member's bill and trying to get voices behind it. And that's really where the coalition comes in. And I think, you know, there's lots of things that we'll be coming to you and asking, and it will be, you know, talking to your local representatives, but also talking to kind of various stakeholders. If you're a member of the CBI or the FSB, you know, engaging with those groups is probably really important. And it's just letting people know that this is around and that this is in the ether. And we're pushing for it, and we're a credible voice. And Chris, I think that's probably it on making this law. So I'll hand back to you with that.
Thank you very much, Karen. And yeah, hopefully that gives everyone a bit of a sense of how much work's been going on behind the scenes in terms of starting those conversations across the board with parliamentarians and lawmakers. And this slide probably looks a bit peculiar, but I wanted to just sort of demonstrate, I suppose, just you know, in a purely kind of schematic way, kind of what this looks like as we look into the weeks and months ahead. And all of you as kind of coalition members, what we're essentially looking at here, in a very broad sense, is two really kind of two very dynamic kind of streams of activity here. One on the coalition side, activating our coalition members, and the other on the public affairs side, having the kind of conversations that Karen's talking about and pouncing on opportunities as well as they come up. And then at key moments through the campaign in these weeks and months ahead, those two kind of work streams, those two flows are going to kind of flow into one kind of powerful river there in the middle. And that's going to happen around kind of key events that we know are in the calendar, like G7, like COP26, like the party conference season. But it's also going to happen, I think, in an opportunistic way, thinking about celebrations when big new businesses join the coalition, for example, and we can get a lot of attention around that. When we spot opportunities, you know, windows of opportunity that we're not expecting, you know, maybe on the public affairs side, but also maybe in terms of kind of broader public engagement. So just to give you a sense for how we're thinking of that, it's this real kind of confluence of kind of real, you know, the incredible kind of influence and awareness that we can drive through the coalition itself, coming together with that kind of public affairs work at really crucial moments. I just want to quickly mention, this is obviously, as I say, kind of just schematic. We're in this kind of the first two blocks there. We're in this kind of launch, kind of 2 weeks of launch phase right now. This is the big coalition launch. This is the first time we've been able to speak to you all. So really exciting. And then on the 14th of April, that's the other lines launch, the parliamentary launch. So once we're through these kind of 2 weeks and these launch moments where we're really kind of coming out in a public sense and driving more people in our direction, then we enter into these sort of these two kind of parallel cadences of some kind of surge and sustain, which are going to run alongside each other and come together through the year. So as we move into that next phase, we'll share more with you all on what that looks like, what that cadence looks like. And of course, as Karen says, we'll be sort of coming to you with asks throughout and opportunities to get involved and to drive this forward. And in the spirit of driving this forward, that's a perfect cue for me to close the presentation and hand over to, we're very lucky to have Douglas Lamont, CEO of Innocent, as chair of the campaign. So I'm going to hand over to Douglas to send us all packing.
I usually do that when I start speaking. Look, Hannah billed it as a keynote speech. I can assure you it's not going to be that. What it is a call to action. Now is our moment, right? It's our moment to act. The conditions for me, the reason I said yes to being co-chair of this campaign is if we don't take advantage of the conditions we've got right now to make this change, to put progressive business thinkers at the heart of the business community, the way that our society works, we're never going to do it. But as you heard, so eloquently from Catherine earlier, that doesn't happen by accident. These changes really need everybody to step up, everybody to come forward. It's great to see so many different types of company on the call today. And as I've seen from the chat, I'm completely clear, diversity is going to be our strength here. So it's absolutely great news that John Lewis Partnership and Waitrose have signed up to the campaign today, and it's great news that we've got big high-profile companies like Danone as part of this campaign. But the strength of this campaign is going to having all types of companies from all parts of the UK with all different perspectives, because at that point we can credibly go to the government and show that we're not some niche movement, we're not some apologetic group of sort of far out thinkers. We represent the voice of progressive business, and we want to make sure that that often too much used phrase of business as a force for good is converted into a reality and doesn't just end up on the pile of business cliches that have existed in the past. But to turn this into a movement, to talk about to create the conditions that Catherine talked about, and funny enough, I was going to jump on the same phrase as leaderful. We need to be leaderful, because Chris and I could only make so many phone calls and have so many conversations and speak at so many events. We need absolutely every single person in this movement to sign up to the values, to sign up to the cause, and then really put their shoulder to the wheel. So the ask from me is for those of you who are dialing in today to listen and understand. Hopefully what you've heard is inspiring and aligns with your values, and therefore you can, straight after this meeting, and hopefully we'll release a few minutes early, and you can go onto the website and you can sign up. But for those of you who have signed up, or for those of you about to sign up, that is just the beginning. My ask is please think about how you are going to be over the next 6 months, because only if we really truly commit with our hearts and with our actions is this going to be a movement, that surge is going to happen, that this momentum is going to happen. So open your black books, take the amazing toolkits that Hannah and the team have built, and hopefully will be in your inboxes shortly, to start to talk about it to your employees, to other business leaders that and I'm completely clear, I don't care whether that's a one-man band or whether that's a FTSE 100 company. Think about who are the people that we can bring on board with us, so that we build that diversity and we maintain the diversity we've got. How do you write a thought piece in your trade magazine? Because it's not just you and your industry we want all the people in your industry. How do you hijack conferences you might be due to speak at, or a shaping to get the word out there? This is going to take conscious action from all of us to really say, right, now is our moment. It's time that progressive leaders really take center stage, and that the government comes hand in hand with us to create the conditions through the Better Business Act to really make sure that we do lead the world to a fairer and more sustainable future. Without that, all of this chat that we've been hearing and that's been building is all just nice words. So let's act together, and let's act with purpose. And I am absolutely confident that we can make this happen. And if we're sitting here in a year's time or 18 months time with that legislation having gone through, we'll not only have transformed the conditions and the circumstances of the UK. The UK is a beacon for the world, and we will be transforming the corporate governance landscape for the whole world over the next 20 years. And that starts with us. That starts with the 200 people on this call. This is the beginning. This is the seed. We now need to grow that oak tree and make that happen. So please help us, please lean in. Any support and energy you can give to the campaign team, because they're mighty, but they are small and there aren't many of them. So any resources from your company or great ideas that you've got, please just keep feeding them towards us, because we need all the help that we can get. With that, I'll finish. Thank you for your time. Hopefully it was inspiring. So, some great content from the team, and yeah, this is our moment. Let's act. And I'll let you go on your way. And with 4 minutes, who are you calling? Who's in your black book? Sign up. Take care, and thank you for joining us today.